This program is sponsored by Futures Unbounded and is responsible for its content.
Welcome, fellow humans, to the Writing on the Wall broadcast, coming to you from WHKW 1220, a Salem radio station. This program is a non-religious, non-spiritual investigation of everything we can discern that was created, recorded, and modeled for us in the Bible. It's generally the way I start out, and I hope you're not tired of hearing about it, but the fact of the matter is that God wants us to respond to reality, not belief or supposition. And unfortunately, we are not doing that. Most of us came to the Bible through a religion or through people who brought us to a religion and said they will teach you about the Bible. Well, generally, the religions taught you about the religion or about the things that they thought were important in the Bible and never thought that the Bible had a single, complete message. It's got so many beautiful sound bites. You know, why would there be a story, a message in the Bible? Well, because God designed it that way. Tonight we're going to study the first 3 chapters of Ecclesiastes. And the reason that we're going to do that is because the time is upon us now, which it was not in Solomon's day. Solomon is the author of Ecclesiastes, and he wrote it when he was the king of Israel in Jerusalem. And that's the way it starts out. The words of the spokesman, the son of David, and the king in Jerusalem. The theme, absolutely pointless, said the spokesman. Absolutely pointless. Everything is pointless. Now, this sounds pretty depressing, right? But you have to read on to understand that he's upset. Solomon is upset because the time was not yet right. And he knew that life was going to pass him by and that people would still be shuffling along and would probably forget him, he thought. We know that they didn't because God had it inscribed in the Bible so that his words of wisdom would be carried down to us. Starting with verse 4. Generations come and generations go, but the earth lasts forever. The sun rises and the sun sets, and then it rushes back to the place where it will rise again. The wind blows towards the south and shifts towards the north. Now, I'm sure that all this was correct 3,000 years ago as far as they could discern, and it gives you a snapshot of the things that they thought and believed at that time, because that was what was apparent to them. They didn't have satellites, so they couldn't tell you anything else. Everyone assumed that this was something that was put up instead of a natural phenomenon. And that's okay, because what we're talking about here is not the planet Earth, but people's jobs and lives on the planet Earth. And that's what he talks about. Verse 9, whatever has happened before will happen again. Whatever has been done before will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. This is pretty famous. Can you say that anything is new? It has already been here long before us. Nothing from the past is remembered. Even in the future, nothing will be remembered by those who come after us. I mentioned this just a couple of moments ago. He's despairing that he's the wisest man in all of Israel and indeed in all of that time period. And he which we can't tell from Ecclesiastes, but I mean, he did amazing things. If you were allied with him, you got the best horse flesh, and you got it at a reasonable price, and nobody tried to cheat you. And everybody got what they needed, and everybody prospered because he looked over it all and would not allow people to destroy others for their own benefit. Then we come to the part where it's easy to skip over. This is verse 12. The spokesman, have been king of Israel in Jerusalem with all my heart. Okay, wholeheartedly. I used wisdom to study and explore everything done under heaven. This is important because everything under heaven is man's domain, and everything under heaven but above men, the prince of the air, is evil's domain. Now, I know that these things sound as though they're spiritual, and this is a non-spiritual investigation. I'm just putting everything in place for you the way that they accepted and believed it back then. So he uses the key term wholeheartedly, and that means without reserve, without wondering if anybody's going to think I'm foolish, or he did not care. And he didn't have to care. He was king of the most prosperous place on the planet that they could find. Mortals are weighed down with a terrible burden that God has placed on them. All right, this is considered his general conclusion. I have seen everything that is done under the sun. Look at it. It's all pointless. It's like trying to catch the wind. No one can straighten what is bent. No one can count what is not there. We understand now that at that time, these things were correct as far as they knew. And that is the point for all this. And you're going to find out he gets to that point. But if you just read a few verses or even one or two chapters, you don't get the full benefit. I'm sure that everybody has heard the song by the Byrds. It was written by Pete Seeger. And to every season, there is Turn, Turn, Turn. It's the name of the I'll get to that's in chapter 3, and I'll get to that. My memory isn't as good as I'd like it to be. The spokesman begins to study life. Verse 16, I thought to myself, I have grown wiser than anyone who has ruled Jerusalem before me. I've had a lot of experience with wisdom and knowledge. I've used my mind to understand wisdom and knowledge as well as madness and stupidity. Now I know that this is like trying to catch the wind. With a lot of wisdom comes a lot of heartache. The greater your knowledge, the greater your pain. And that ends chapter 1. So he's saying that just because you have knowledge, just because you are wise, there does not seem to be, at the time that he exists, any point to the entire exercise of mankind being on earth. And that is the central message. 3,000 years ago, when it was his time, it was not yet mankind's time following God's plan. Today is mankind's time. And we're going to go through it. Chapter 2, the spokesman studies laughter. I thought to myself, now I want to experiment with pleasure and enjoy myself. But even this was pointless. I thought, laughter doesn't make any sense. What does pleasure accomplish? The spokesman studies wine. I explored ways to make myself feel better by drinking wine. I also explored ways to do some foolish things. During all that time, wisdom continued to control my mind. I was able to determine whether this was good for mortals to do during their brief lives under heaven. I accomplished some great things. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself. I planted every kind of fruit tree in them. I made pools to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves. In addition, slaves were born in my household. I owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I also gathered silver and gold for myself. I gathered the treasures of kings and provinces. I provided myself with male and female singers, and the pleasures men have with one concubine after another. So I grew richer than anyone in Jerusalem before me, yet my wisdom remained with me. If something appealed to me, I did it. I allowed myself to have any pleasure I wanted, since I found pleasure in my work. This was my reward for all my hard work. But when I turned to look at all that I had accomplished and all the hard work I had put into it, I saw that it was all pointless. It was like trying to catch the wind. I gained nothing from any of my accomplishments under the sun. Then I turned my attention to experience, wisdom, madness, and foolishness. For instance, what can the man who replaces the king do? Only what has already been done. But I saw that wisdom has an advantage over foolishness at light, just the same as light has an advantage over darkness. A wise person uses the eyes in his head, but a fool walks in the dark. But I've also come to realize that the same destiny waits for both of them. I thought to myself, if the destiny that waits for the fool waits for me as well, then what is the advantage in being wise? So I thought that even this is pointless. Neither the wise person nor the fool will be remembered for long, since both will be forgotten in the days to come. Both the wise person and the fool will die. So I came to hate life because everything done under the sun seemed wrong to me. Everything was pointless. It was like trying to catch the wind. I came to hate everything for which I had worked so hard under the sun, because I will have to leave it to the person who replaces me. Who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish? He will still have control over everything under the sun for which I worked so hard and used my wisdom. Even this is pointless. Then I fell into despair over everything for which I had worked so hard under the sun. Here is someone who had worked hard with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, yet he must turn over his estate to someone else who didn't work for it. Even this is pointless and a terrible tragedy. What do people get from all their hard work and struggles under the sun? Their entire life is filled with pain, and their work is unbearable. Even at night, their minds don't rest. Even this is pointless. Now here's where we turn. All of this has been from the viewpoint of a man among men, the wisest of all, the richest of all, the best connected of all. And he says that everything that depends on even using wisdom, but only contained in one lifetime, is pointless. And now we get to verse 24. There is nothing better for people to do than to eat, drink, and find satisfaction in their work. I saw that even this comes from the hand of God. Who can eat or enjoy themselves without God? God gives wisdom, knowledge, and joy to anyone who pleases him. But to the person who continues to sin, he gives the job of gathering and collecting wealth. The sinner must turn his wealth over to the person who pleases God. Even this is pointless. It's like trying to catch the wind. All right, so hopefully you're understanding this preamble. Everything that a human does for himself can be collected. It can be stored while you're alive, but you have no say over it once you die. And your human life, which may be 70 years, maybe more, maybe less, is all that you have. Now we get to chapter 3. And this is important. This is what chapter 1 and 2 has led up to. If you were depressed reading 1 and 2, and you got that everything was pointless, like trying to catch the wind for a human, then you come to chapter 3. Everything has its own time, and there is a specific time for every activity under heaven. And here's where the song comes in. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to reap. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build up. A time to cry and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to hug and a time to stop hugging. A time to start looking and a time to stop looking. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear apart and a time to sew together. A time to keep quiet and a time to speak out. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. God is what gives mortals a sense of eternity. Your memory only lasts as long as you live. Your soul, on the other hand, goes on. But it's the fact of the knowledge of God that gives mortals a sense of eternity. 3,000 years ago, Solomon realized this. So everything he could do on his own was pointless because there's no way that he'd reserve or keep anything past his death. But with God, there's a point to everything. All right, starting with verse 9. What do working people gain from their hard labor? I have seen mortals weighed down with a burden that God has placed on them. Now, what burden is this? This burden is a lack of knowledge in a world where we have made knowledge king. When Adam chose the tree of knowledge, he made knowledge king. Only we are not knowledgeable. We have to learn and grope and try very hard to understand. And this is what Solomon is trying to get across to us. It is beautiful how God has done everything at the right time. He has put a sense of eternity in people's minds. Yet mortals still can't grasp what God is doing from the beginning to the end of time. This is extremely important. This is what this whole message is about, and that's why I am on this radio station, broadcasting to you. And this will be recorded and used on a podcast or on a website where you can draw up the podcast. The fact of the matter is, it is our time. We were supposed to grow and mature. There was a time set aside by God for us to want to become adults. And that's why He gave us the Bible with all the instructions, directions, examples, and models in it. Now, something that as intelligent and as wise as Solomon was, even he could not discern the difference between subjective and objective decision making. And that's the point. That's why Jesus was sent, because no one could pick it up on their own. And the only reason that I got it is from reading the Bible and going through what Jesus said and paying very close attention to His words, especially when He said, "No one goes unto the Father but doing as I do." And reading all the things that He did and seeing what someone would have to be in order to make those decisions. Now, most people just short him, oh, well, He was the Son of God. And that's a religious belief. He very, very strongly said, I am not the Son of God. Well, I shouldn't say that. He said, I am the Son of Man, and I was sent to do a job. And that's the important point. One of the many is that Jesus came and gave us the information, and we didn't get it even then. But it was recorded for us in the Bible and kept for us so that now that we are sophisticated enough to understand, now that we have done enough of the prep work, we can do as Jesus did. And that doesn't make us holier than thou or anything else like that. It just means that we can finally understand what Jesus had to say and why He said it, and we can follow. And I don't mean just by doing good works or anything like that, although that's nice, and it helps. But the most important thing, the thing for us all to remember is John 7:24, when Jesus said, I came to get you from making decisions based on what you see to judge correctly. Outward appearances don't count. And that's another one of the many important points. Yet mortals still can't grasp what God is doing from the beginning to the end of time. It is time now for us to begin to grasp what it is that God is doing and why He is doing it. And He left us the Bible. He left us instructions, examples, and models. And we need to follow them. In a couple of minutes now, we're going to go to the break, and we'll talk. We'll have our sponsors, say something, and if they are people that you can use their services, please do. I'm happy that they support our program. But the fact of the matter is that we need to drill down on this now that it is our time. So Solomon realized that the time was not yet for mankind, and that he was a man, and that it was going to pass him by. What he didn't realize, and what none of us realized until we started to study our bodies and discovered what DNA was, that our souls have the same spiritual recording ability that our bodies have using DNA. So, and on the other side of the break, that's what we're going to break down and discuss. But remember, God has said, everything has a season, and it is now our season. Thank you. Talk to you after the break.
Swamp, fake news, racist hats? Are you afraid to believe anymore? Well, let me tell you of one brave soul who, like David, slew Goliath. The true story of one man's fight against greed, corruption, and insatiable ambition in small-town Ohio, Checkmate reveals why passion and integrity are rare in the corridors of swing state politics. If you want to hear the truth, how the swamp operates in Ohio with all the political corruption in real time, get Steve Krause's tell-all true life story, Checkmate, One Man's Fight Against Political Corruption, available on Amazon. As a newly elected state representative, Steve takes you behind the scenes, behind the closed doors, and rips back the curtain to expose all the lies, the deceit, and power-hungry gamesmanship. Checkmate reads like a TV drama, but it's not.
Once you start it, you won't be able to put it down.
Checkmate, One Man's Fight Against Political Corruption by Steve Krause, available on Amazon today. Be afraid. Be very afraid. There are those in Washington who want the IRS to take more of your hard-earned money. Are you tired of being the perpetual cash cow for every scheme, unreasonable program, and for all the fraud, waste, and abuse in our system? Well, good news. I can help. George Satari has almost 40 years of experience helping people like you keep more of what you make. It makes no sense that the more you make, the more they take. Let George help you keep your money away from the government bureaucratic waste and in your pocket. Call 216-651-1120 right now and schedule your free consultation today. Instead of a victim, you'll be the victor. With many success stories, George helps with tax planning, estate planning, financial and business analysis, and more. The new tax law has many ways to save money with retirement planning, accelerated depreciation, up to 20% exception of net earnings, and so much more. Call 216-651-1120. That's 216-651-1120. You earn it, we'll help you keep it. That's George Satari, CPA, 216-651-1120.
Radio broadcast coming to you from WHK 1220, a Salem radio station. All right, we're still in Ecclesiastes 3 because the most intelligent, wisest man in the known world 3,000 years ago was writing that life without God was pointless and that God gave man a sense of eternity that without God, they would not have. And I agree with all this. It's completely true. But something that he could understand but couldn't really foresee is the fact that there is a time for everything under heaven. God's time. That things happen in a chain of events that is important because towards the end of that chain, I shouldn't say end, but towards the latter part of that chain, hopefully, humans have been dragged through enough and retained enough and talked about it enough and actually recorded it so that they understand a little bit more about themselves and their time here on earth. But when Solomon was writing this, again, about 3,000 years ago, that had not happened. All the writings at that time that had been preserved were preserved by priests, and they were religious. So the things that he wrote were preserved, but not by the priests. So God gives mortals a sense of eternity. This is chapter 3, verse 9. What do working people gain from their hard labor? I have seen mortals weighed down with a burden that God has placed on them, and that is the burden of trudging through this world, not understanding what it is you do or why you do it. And that's because Adam got us kicked out of the garden before we could get the full skinny. So God was explaining to us piecemeal, having it happen to us and having it recorded so that we would understand, accept, and believe until we could get to the point where we could understand. God does not want you to believe. He wants you to understand. And in that case, you are going to have to, there's only one absolute way to get to that, and that is through reality. Belief systems are just that. They are a guess that somebody made and somebody else said, yeah, that sounds good. And then they all pushed it on a third guy and a fourth, and they all just kept pushing it because, hey, that sounds good. Unfortunately, that's all that beliefs are, and that's all that religions are. Religions are human beliefs about God. And, ever since the New Testament was written, about Jesus. Even though Jesus said he did not come to do anything new or to start anything new, that's exactly what happened. That's what men did. They started religions based on him coming. So what is this desire for humans to create religions as a barrier between us and God? Well, some people, it's not a barrier, it's a help. We're getting closer to God by studying the religions. No, you're not. You're getting closer to the people who talk about religions. And that may bring you a lot of comfort. But God already wrote down for you, or had written down for you, everything that you need to know about your place here on earth and the reason for your existence. Now, I understand you need to read the Bible for content and not just for the sound bites. The big three questions that God wants you to consider every day is: who are you? What are you? And why are you here on earth? That is your job. Every day, not just once every 7 days. Every day. You need to think about that and think about all that you see and know and hear and understand here on earth, a world overseen by God. I almost hate to use the term God because everybody thinks they know who and what God is. And I'm here to tell you from my reading of the Bible, God is a whole lot more involved, sophisticated, and out of reach of our complete knowledge. There is no way that we will be able to encapsulate God. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't take up his challenge and try to understand who we are, what we are, and why we are here on earth. Now, it's not so that we can save ourselves or anything foolish like that. You need to leave that up to God. But he did give us the methodology for what our forebears 2,000 years ago called salvation. Now, they looked at it as a spiritual salvation because the body dies. Every man born of woman dies. They didn't know about DNA. They knew about the soul. They accepted the fact that it existed and that it went onwards after the body's death. But there were varying opinions whether that soul would get issued another body any time other than at the last trumpet. So that is something you need to consider. Paul obviously believed that we would come back more than one time before the last trumpet sound, but that if we were Christians, that we would be together with Jesus when that last trumpet sounded, and we would have new bodies. So that's something you need to consider as a possibility. Maybe Paul knew what he was talking about. I accept it. But that's neither here nor there. That's above my pay grade. But here I am on earth, and I'm going through Ecclesiastes 3 now. And Solomon says that in verse 12, I realize that there's nothing better for them to do than to be cheerful and enjoy what is good in their lives. It is a gift from God to be able to eat and drink and experience the good that comes from every kind of hard work. I realize that whatever God does will last forever. Nothing can be added to it, and nothing can be taken away from it. God does this so that people, and here is where my translation goes off the beaten path. It says, fear him. Now, you look in other translations, it says, love him. You look in different translations, it says, worship him. So I think that those three areas, if you want to combine it all into one master verb, if you will, then that's fine. You can love, fear, and worship him. Whatever has happened in the past is present now. Whatever is going to happen in the future has already happened in the past. God will call the past to account. And here's the part where Solomon wants you to think about your body. I saw something else under the sun, verse 16. There is wickedness where justice should be found. There is wickedness where righteousness should be found. I thought to myself, God will judge righteous people as well as wicked people, because there is a specific time for every activity and every work that is done. This is our central theme, that God has something going on here. He does nothing without a purpose. We don't know what that purpose is. And 3,000 years ago, Solomon, the wisest man, said, hey, just live to enjoy life. Do as hard a work as you can and enjoy that. Be joyful in your life. It's a gift. Experience what you can. Learn what you can. But know that you cannot take it with you. You cannot take it with you in your body. But your soul can take it with you. And that's the part that he could not figure out, accept, admit to, that 1,000 years later, Paul could. Now, an awful lot happened in that 1,000 years. About 300 years after this, Jeremiah asked God some rather pointed questions, and God answered him. He didn't equivocate. He didn't make excuses. He didn't say, you're not bright enough to understand. You need to read the book of Jeremiah, at least the first 27 chapters. You'll be shocked at what you find. God was not afraid to give out the answers. He does not want us to be children, or, as Solomon puts it, fools stumbling in the dark. He wants us to understand what it is he's doing here. That's Jeremiah 9:24. He wants us to work on this and discover what it is that he's doing for us and why he's doing it for us. So you need to read the Bible for content. I had Bible study this morning with a bunch of great guys. They're all religious people. And they all kind of took umbrage at the fact that I said, we place religion before us, between us and God. Well, that can't be true. Our religions help us learn about God. I said, perhaps. But they don't get you any closer to God. The only thing that gets you closer to God, prayer helps. Reading the Bible, God's Word. Starting with verse 22, Solomon says, I saw that there's nothing better for people to do to enjoy their work, because that is their lot in life. Who will allow them to see what will happen after them? This is a big problem for Solomon. His curiosity, his wisdom, all that he's learned and all that he's done makes him want to know more. He wants to know what's at the end. And he did not have enough information to figure it out yet. He didn't know that Jesus would have to be sent and that people would have to understand what it is that he was trying to tell us in order to judge correctly and figure out why it is that God wanted us to not only know this, but to understand it. Because it was not yet time. When Jesus told his disciples in the upper room, his time had come. They didn't know. They didn't understand. They thought that he was going to take over the rulership of Israel and send the Romans packing. And of course, that is not at all what Jesus was here for. He was here to give us the information we needed in order to understand what it is that God is doing for us here out on earth and with us. You truly do have free will. You can choose to read the Bible or not. You can choose to try and figure it out or not. You can skip merrily through life, eating and drinking and not thinking a thing, but then you are foolish. But you can choose to be foolish if you want. God told us that this was man's opportunity. When he was talking to Moses, Moses was the first lawyer, whether you realize it or not. He was talking to Moses, and Moses was talking to the people, and they asked God for some boons, some favors. One, they asked him to never send them a prophet that wasn't born a Jew. He agreed to that. They asked him, would he please become their God. Lots of other peoples had gods, they didn't have one. Would he become their God? He was already the Lord of all on earth, but they wanted him to be their God, and he agreed, if they would follow what he told them to do. Well, we know how that worked out. The Jews are absolutely the worst at following through. Absolutely the worst. And he told them, you have the opportunity to be the beacon for all mankind. You will be an example before all men for good or for ill. The choice is yours. Free will. They made that choice. And because of it, they are still outside of God's love and acceptance. They are not in the hunt to discover what it is that God wanted from us. Instead, they follow their man-made religion. All religions are man-made. Ask yourself, what is God's religion? Oh, God doesn't have a religion. Why doesn't God have a religion? What is religion? You can say, well, religion gives us an opportunity to study something. NASCAR's a religion, NFL's a religion, Catholicism is a religion. All religions are man-made. Therefore, all religions have feet of clay. It wasn't just a few bad priests that molested the choir boys. Or it may have been physically a certain number, but it's because they felt they could get away with it. The reason they felt they could get away with it is because no one was looking past the religion they put in front of them. In the Bible, it tells us about the ephod, I believe it's called, that they put on their breasts to represent the fact that they were speaking for God. And as we know, no man has the right to speak for God. Only God can speak for God. And that's what the Bible's about. So the thing that I want to do, and I want to get you to understand is not just the fact that Solomon had a hard time with the fact that the time was not yet ripe for man, and that he was going to be born, live, and die, and he would learn a tremendous amount, and he would become the wisest individual of his time, and he would be rich beyond measure, but he still would not know what it was that God wanted of mankind. And that was because the time was not yet ripe. Well, brothers and sisters, listening to this, guess what? The time is right. You have the Bible, or the ability to have the Bible, in your hot little hands, and you can go online and read all different kinds of translations. Now realize, all the translations are made by people who are not only raised in religious atmospheres, but are who being paid by religious individuals in order to translate the Bible. So please be understanding that what they say is religiously oriented, and search even deeper. Go through all the different translations you can find to try and figure it out, what is it that God was trying to get across to you. That's what I've done. That's what I recommend you doing. The fact of the matter is, God does love us. He would not give us this opportunity on earth unless there was an opportunity for us to win, not just to exist. And he sent Jesus to give us the explanation of what it would take for us to switch from the physical, subjective decision-making paradigm that we learned as babes in a body, rubbing up against other bodies and other inconsistencies, until we got to the point where we could learn enough so that we could read his words and discern what it is that he wanted us to know, and could actually make the switch to objective decision-making. That doesn't mean that you leave subjective decision-making behind completely. You know, you might like a hamburger, like certain music, whatever, and all that's subjective, and that's fine, because that's exactly what it was created for. But when you're talking about God and mankind's opportunities on earth, the only thing that will work is switching to the objective decision-making method that Jesus taught. And you can best learn about that in the Gospel of John. It's amazing. All right, well, we've only got a minute or two left, and we're going to be switching off for the evening. I'm going to read, go out on 1 Thessalonians 5 from Paul, starting with verse 16. Always be joyful, never stop praying. Whatever happens, give thanks, because it is God's will in Christ Jesus that you do this. Don't put out the Spirit's fire. Don't despise what God has revealed. Instead, test everything. Hold on to what is good, and keep away from every kind of evil. And this is TA signing off for the evening, and I hope that all goes well with you, and that we'll be together again next week, this same time, here on WHKW 1220, a Salem radio station. Thank you.
This program has been sponsored by George Satari, CPA.